Hello everyone. Today I will be delivering a short lecture on the socio-political and historical context pertaining to the Middle English period. The first thing that we should note about the Middle English period is that it extends from 1066 AD to 1558 AD. A question which comes to our mind is that why we have chosen these two dates as the dates to compartmentalize the Middle English period between. Now, the reason for this is that 1066 was the year in which the French conquered England. William the Conqueror was a French king and he fought a war and conquered England in 1066 AD. In 1558 AD, Queen Elizabeth ascended to the throne of England, which marks the beginning of the modern era. Between these two dates, we have the Middle English period. Now, why do we call it Middle English? How is it different from Old English? Now, we have seen that in the Old English period there were Germanic tribes and their language came to be known as Old English. Now, when the French invaded England and conquered England under William of Orange, or who is also known as William the Conqueror, there was a perceptible French influence on English language. The nature of English language changed, and that differentiated English of this period from the English that was spoken earlier. That means English evolved with the influence of French. Primarily, this is why this period saw a transition to a new phase. Now, there are certain other socio-political contexts which are necessary for us to know if we are to appreciate the Middle English literature. In this lecture, I will be delivering some points which are not exactly related to literature but are nonetheless very significant and very important in our overall understanding of literature. So, the first point that I want to tell you is that English society at this point of time was essentially feudal, with the king at the top, followed by the duke or the count, who had in turn barons below him. Barons had knights below them. Below the knights were the peasants, and below the peasants there were serfs. It was a hierarchical society, and the hierarchy was maintained at all costs. The second thing was that during the Middle English period, during 11th century and 12th century, the two of the great universities of England, Cambridge and Oxford, both were established. Now, after this, the third point that I want to tell you is that Old English had transitioned into Middle English, and there we have some of the great men of letters. Among them, one very important was John Wycliffe. John Wycliffe is very important figure because he translated the Bible from Latin into English in the year 1382. His followers were known as the Lollards. He raised his voice against the ills of the ecclesiastical order of the church, which was Catholic at that point of time. Then a very important political development I would like to talk about is the evolution of the parliamentary system in England. In 1215, Magna Carta was documented against the incompetence of King John. Rule of law was established, and under Edward the First model parliament was established. So here we see that the power of the king had to be checked. There were some checks and balances, although rudimentary, but nonetheless they were present. Some more historical facts about wars. There was 100 Years' War between England and France, which was started by Edward the Third, who from his mother's side had royal French lineage, and he claimed the throne of France, obviously, to which the French did not agree, and it led to a long drawn battle, a long drawn war. This 100 Years' War started in the third decade of the 14th century. Was uncalled for. At least it had nothing beneficial for the lower class people of England. Wat Tyler, a peasant leader, rebelled against the excesses of the war and against the excesses of monarchy that were not in the interest of the general people. This took place in 1381, and because of the rebellion, it caused considerable headache to the monarchy. Although the rebellion was in due course crushed, and Wat Tyler was also beheaded, but nonetheless, this development led to the overall emphasis on the welfare of people, that the royalty or the monarchy must heed to the needs of the people. Then some technological developments took place. Gutenberg invented the printing machine in 1445, and the printing machine was brought to England in 1476 by Caxton. It made printing easier. Books were now easily available and they were not expensive. as before. So it led to the acceleration in the overall process of learning, and it is a milestone as far as the English Renaissance is concerned. Then, one more important point is that King Henry the Seventh defeated King Richard the Third in the War of Roses. The War of Roses, which was fought between the House of York and the House of Lancaster for the control over the throne of England. Richard III was the ruling king from the House of York. He was a cruel king. And Henry the Tudor was from the House of Lancaster. Henry the Tudor, who later on became Henry VII, defeated Richard III, and thus the Tudor dynasty was established. In the year 1525, Tyndale's translation of the New Testament appeared. And this was very significant. And the last event that I want to talk about is during the rule of Henry VIII, who was the father of Queen Elizabeth. During the rule of Henry VIII, the Act of Supremacy was passed. What was this act? This act was about the delinking of the Church of England from the Church of Rome. Pope's authority was undermined, and Henry VIII, because of his dissension with Pope, declared himself to be the head of the Church of England. All these developments took place between the 11th century and the 16th century. That is the mid part of the 16th century. This phase from 1066 to 1558 is the Middle English period. Now, after having discussed all this, we will just recount the names of some of the important authors and some of the important works. There were, in the 14th century, some works which don't have an established authorship but which are very important. Those works belong to the same manuscript that is available, and that is why it is believed that they all have the same author. Those works include the romances like Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. It includes a very important poem that is Pearl, an important poem that is Patience and Cleanness. These four, Pearl, Patience and Cleanness, along with Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, belong to the same manuscript, the authorship of which is unknown, and it is generally called as belonging to the works of the Pearl poet. Actually, the poet is named after the work, the Pearl Poet. In the 14th century, we have the great Geoffrey Chaucer, who is considered to be the father of English literature, who wrote works like the Canterbury Tales, Romance of the Rose, Troilus and Cressida, Parliament of Fowls, and other works. Then we have John Gower. John Gower wrote in French, he wrote in Latin, and he wrote in English. The work that he wrote in English is Confessio Amantis, and that is important for us to understand because it is his English work. Then we have another very important work, Piers the Plowman, composed by William Langland. It is about the dream vision of the poet, and it is an allegory. It makes a social commentary on the then situation prevalent in England. Sometimes it is said, actually, Piers the Plowman was published in the year 1379, and Wat Tyler's rebellion took place in 1381. So people have drawn links between Piers the Plowman and the Peasants' Rebellion, and this text is also considered to be a subversive text which is anti-establishmentarian. Then there is another important work, but from the 15th century, that is Thomas Malory's Morte de Arthur. It is a prose work, and this work is based on Arthurian romances. So we see that Middle English period was a time of tremendous socio-political unrest, and it was also a time of a lot of creativity. Here lies the significance of this period in the overall evolution of English literature. This is all I would talk to in this lecture. I hope it proves useful. And last time around, I forgot to make a request. This time I'll make it. If you find this lecture useful, if you feel benefited by it, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and keep spreading the word. Thank you.